Hello and welcome back to Maesterminds, a familiar-sounding podcast with a now legally distinct name. I'm Dan Casey, and once again, we're here to bring you the Westeros that Westeros has to offer with our weekly breakdown of House of the Dragon. This time, it's Season 2. And it has been a long, arduous 2 years since we last saw the opening steps of the Dance of the Dragons, but we're back, baby. And once again, the Season 2 premiere, in grand Game of Thrones fashion, gave us a heaping helping of table setting, backroom dealings, and one of the most highly anticipated adaptations of the book on which it's based. But before we get into it, joining me as always on our small council is Nerdist staff writer, our resident lore master, and someone who has takes of ice and fire, Michael Walsh.
Hi Dan, thanks for having me back.
Of course, Mikey. It wouldn't be Maesterminds, the name this podcast has always had, without you. I'm curious for. Look, it's something that we had our scholars working on. They were forging their chains, and it came to them in an epiphany deep in the archives. But I'm curious for you, how does it feel to have Sir Criston Cole back on your television after 2 long years?
This might surprise you and might surprise everyone. It doesn't really change much for me because my Criston Cole hate is a 365-day-a-year thing. It doesn't go away. He doesn't have to be on my screen for me to feel my hatred for him. But obviously it's worse. It's worse.
Of course. I appreciate that hating is a full-time job for you, as it should be for all of us. Look, if you're not waking up first thing in the morning just red-faced with anger about Criston Cole, you're not watching this show hard enough.
You're not living hard enough.
Yeah. Well, let's start breaking down the episode. I want to get into this in just a moment, but first, for everybody out there, obviously, spoiler warning for the events of House of the Dragon Season 2, the premiere episode. We're going to break it down, and to do so, we have to talk about it in detail, which means we have to talk about things that happened on the show. Now, I know what you're thinking. What about book spoilers, Dan? Well, book spoilers, there may be some that eke through, but we are going to try and keep them to a minimum. But if you haven't seen the episode yet, that's the more pressing thing. So if you haven't watched yet, leave now before it's too late. Okay, that's your final warning. All right. So, Mikey, what was your overall impression of this episode of the Season 2 premiere?
Dan, viewers who are with us through Season 1 know that the show really took a bad turn for me late in the year. After loving it through 7.99 episodes, I did not like how it ended. And I went into this a little worried that I might not be able to get past what I think are some fundamental issues. And then I kind of loved this episode. I thought it really did a lot of things well. I think it even started to fix some of those mistakes from the first things that I think are mistakes from the first season. And I also went into this episode wanting to get back on track with it, to enjoy it, to feel the way I did before I turned on it. And then the final scene of this absolutely undid all of the goodwill. All of my efforts to come on and be only positive today completely went out the window. I'm about as low on a certain part of this episode as I've ever been on any single adaptation, period.
Wow. Okay, that is strong. I definitely. We're going to get to that adaptation moment because I'm sort of aligned with you on this, and we chatted a little bit before we recorded. But I want to build up to that first because, as you mentioned, there was a lot to like about this episode. I think as far as these table setting moments go, I think they handled it pretty well and kept things moving at a pretty steady clip. I feel like we maneuvered these characters into a place where, okay, we reminded everyone what happened because it has been 2 years. Like, I feel like a lot of folks out there needed a recap. And if you need that, you can find one on Nerdist.com. We've got you covered audio, video, text. You can print it out. You can put it on a phonograph, put it in one of those little recording tubes and get your old-timey phonograph to read it to you. But I definitely think that the 2-year break kind of worked against them a little bit. But I think with that in mind, they really hit the ground running, despite it mostly being a lot of people sitting down and talking at tables in back rooms and sort of maneuvering their chess pieces before everything sort of all hell breaks loose later in the season. But speaking of this season, one thing that I think I forgot about until I was prepping for this is last season we had 10 episodes, but this season it's only 8. What do you think about that? Do you think that's going to serve the show better, or do you think that it's just, trying to do fewer episodes better, or would you rather have them have the 10 episodes so they can stretch it out as it's a dense book. You can definitely mine 10 episodes of content out of this section alone.
I think that if their goal is to do 4 seasons instead of 3, that this makes sense. Just knowing the full story and how, for all of the many years, decades that they covered in season 1, it is now going to be very condensed in terms of how long this story goes from the start of the war to the end. And just knowing the major beats, knowing what's coming, in my head, I'm like, that doesn't feel like for a 4-season show or 3 more seasons as it would be, unless they cut back. And I'd much rather have 3 shorter seasons than 2 longer ones. My biggest gripe is that season 1 should have been longer. They missed some opportunities to really establish some important relationships and to further deepen the divide between the families and how it got that bad. But, that's in the past, and we got to move forward, and I think that's fine.
What do you think was the biggest omission from season 1 that you hope they maybe rectify this season?
Well, it's kind of tough because I think the biggest problem was they didn't really show just how horrible things got between the Greens and the Blacks and how truly divided the court was. Like they showed the moment where Aemon loses his eye, but that really comes after a lot of problems and a lot of very public issues and a lot of Viserys trying to reconcile the families. I also would have liked to have seen, her relationship with Harwin Strong developed a little bit more. It kind of just was dumped on us after, they had one passing in the middle of the night. So, like I said, there's really not much they can do at this point. It is what it is. Luke is dead, and that's more than enough to get this going. And obviously, the way this episode ends is more than enough to make sure people know how much wanton violence is coming.
Yeah, definitely. We'll get to that as well, but we are well past the point of no return with this impending civil war. But I know you mentioned that the end didn't super work for you, but what worked the best for you this episode?
This is a very me answer. I completely lost my mind in a good way, just so people don't think I want to hate on this. I want to love these things. For as angry as I was at the end, when I realized what the first scene really did, I completely lost my mind because it is not just full of new lore, it is full of important lore. That scene with Jason Cregan Stark has so much more going on and reveals so much more than it might seem. I know we're probably going to get into it very quickly, but I love that scene.
Let's just talk about it now.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. This is something that... Yeah, for people who don't know the history of Westeros because they have better things to do, good for you. But fortunately, I don't. The meeting between Jason and Lord Cregan Stark, the young wolf, who's very young, he's only 21. That is a much longer scene in the books, and there's some stuff that they kind of left out. There's always been these ideas that Jace actually married Cregan's bastard sister, Sarah Snow, who we didn't even get to see. There have long been whispers, although a lot of people don't believe them. And by the way, when I say people, I'm talking about people in Westeros, like they're real, as I am wont to do. That his dragon Vermax might have left a clutch of eggs at Winterfell that could have ultimately played a part in the future. None of that was there, but instead we got something totally new. And what was so exciting was when they met up on the wall, they were talking about their two families' relationships, which started 100 years earlier when Aegon Targaryen came to conquer Westeros. As we learned in season 1, Aegon was not just ambitious. Aegon had a dream. He had a dream that the White Walkers were coming, that they were going to come out of the distant north, and this is why he needed to unify Westeros, because the only chance the living had was a unified Westeros with a Targaryen king.
And for people who don't know, this wasn't just like, oh, I had a crazy dream last night. He is a dragon dreamer, something with the Targaryen bloodline. Occasionally manifests where these folks have prophetic dreams of the future, and we've seen that as well in this show with Helena a little bit having some of these miniature prophecies when she is hard and fast at work at her needlepoint.
Yeah, that is the reason Viserys is so obsessed with his dreams and whether or not he was right or wrong. It's why the Targaryens survived, because a daughter of the family had a dream about the Doom, and they fled a century before Valyria was completely
Was her name again
destroyed. I know her father's Aenys.
That's Enos, unfortunate.
Yeah, well, probably Enos, right? She saved the family then. So Aegon has this dream. He comes to Westeros, and what happens is he just takes it over very quickly. Those who bend the knee, he empowers, he makes them allies, he brings them in. Those who don't, he wipes them out with his dragons. Him and his sisters, they wipe them out with their dragons, including some ancient lines that go back thousands of years. They're just wiped out. So, as usual, it's very hard, even for a Stark, to gather his forces because the North is so big. The North is almost as big as the other 6 kingdoms combined. But when King Torrhen Stark finally gets his forces, he marches them past the neck into the Riverlands, and Aegon shows up. And before the battle, northern lords want to fight. This is what the North does. They fight, right? They fought against the Andals and they won. They fought against the Children of the War and came to a peace and they survived, right? This is what the Northerners do. But instead, Torrhen Stark sends his bastard brother and some maesters to meet with Aegon. And the next morning, Torrhen Stark kind of shocks everybody by bending the knee. He's named, Warden of the North. He is taken in, and it's always been a question, why would Torrhen do this? Well, it seems obvious, right? He wanted to save his people. He wasn't letting his pride get in the way. But it always felt a little off, right? Why wouldn't he maybe offer a single combat with Aegon? Even if he gets killed, his people will be safe, right? He can just put himself at risk. Or, wouldn't a Stark really just go out on this shield? He doesn't do it. So the reason this is so exciting, the scene with Cregan and Jace, is they talk about this. Mm-hmm. They talk about it. Jace brings it up. Your ancestor, I would have thought Torrhen Stark would have fought, but he obviously didn't because he believed Aegon could unite the realm. Except nobody cared about that. Torrhen Stark would not have cared about uniting the realm. The 7 kingdoms fought for thousands of years. They were fine. The North especially wanted to be left alone. They kept the old gods. Their blood was the blood of the first men. They weren't mixing with Andals for the most part. They were their own people. They were content to be left alone. Why would Torrhen Stark give a crap about Aegon uniting the realm? The rest of the scene and everything around it tells us. So it opens with Cregan Stark sending 1 in 10 of his own kin to the Night's Watch. He talks about duty. I made a million of duty is sacrifice, right? It's more important than your own blood. He's sending them to the Night's Watch because he knows, and he tells Jace, this is why I can't send all my men to your mother. I need them here. I have an even more important oath to keep, which is to protect the wall in winter, because he knows that outside is death. He knows the White Walkers are out there. And at the beginning, he's sending his own family willy-nilly, right? Randomly. He's not like picking the worst. He could be sending them
just picking stones out of a bag.
Yeah. He's sending them to the Night's Watch. Why? Because the Night's Watch is not very good. It's made up of doomed men, right? And we know from Game of Thrones, these are rapists, these are thieves, these are cravens. These are not the best of the best. They need the best of the best to lead them and to keep them in line, and that is the Starks. This is an ancient problem. But this whole drawing of the lot only began with Torrhen Stark right after he bent the knee to Aegon. Why weren't the Starks doing this before, and what changed? Because Aegon told him about the dream. This is the revelation that had me freaking out. I literally yelled out loud because this is literally the entire heart and core of George R.R. Martin's story, a song of ice and fire. It wasn't just that Aegon the Conqueror thought the White Walkers were ice. He knew the Starks are the first line of defense. The Starks in the North, I need them more than anybody. So I think it's pretty clear. Someone could say it's not obvious, but I think it's all there. I think all the evidence is more than there.
Oh yeah, I mean, even this line later when they're talking about it was King Jaehaerys and Queen Alicent's trip to the Wall, and they came there to visit, and their dragons would not venture past it. And Cregan's line, do you think my ancestors built a 700-foot wall of ice to keep out snow and savages? That speaks volumes so much more in the context of Torrhen knowing about Aegon's dream because, yeah, Aegon's probably the only person who took the Starks seriously. They've spent all of this time manning their gigantic ice wall. I'm sure the rest of the 7 kingdoms thought they were kind of kooky, but the fact that Aegon's like, hey, I had a dream and I know what you're keeping out with that wall, and I believe you. I'm sure that would clearly be enough to make Cregan's ancestor Torrhen be like, oh yeah, okay, I'm going to take the knee on this one, and we'll scuffle later on, but I'm gonna take a quick knee here.
It's exactly what Jon Snow will do. Jon Snow, the King of the North, is going to bend the knee to Daenerys because he knows winter is coming. These words of House Stark, the only ones that are truly a dire warning of all the houses in the realm, it's not something they take lightly. Even with thousands of years, the Starks know what's really out there. And this is what Aegon clearly sees. This wall is not here to keep out wildlings and weather, like Jace said. By the way, some great alliteration, right? Wildlings and weather, savages and snow. Oh, so good, love it.
They cooked on this scene.
Oh, this is it. This is a Game of Thrones. This is a Song of Ice and Fire, and what it does is, and this is what a great prequel will do, right? It will enrich the original story. This is not only enriching Game of Thrones and Martin's novels; it's enriching everything because it's deepening the bonds between House Stark and House Targaryen, Ice and Fire, Rhaegar and Lyanna's love, and their son, Jon Snow, who will, in fact, be the only one who can go on to unite the realm to stand against the White Walkers. It's perfect. I love it. I get George R. R. Martin on the phone. I want to talk about it for the next 15 hours, and then he can go back to writing.
Yes, go back to writing. That's definitely what he has on his docket for today, not playing with model trains or doing literally anything else. Something else I really loved about this opening scene was the initial framing device of we see a raven flying across the landscape through the forests towards Winterfell and eventually to the Wall. And it's just so cool because it serves to just sort of lay the groundwork, show us Westeros again, get us this like overhead view, a bird's eye view, if you will, of the countryside. But it also just immediately situates us in time because we find out that is the Raven announcing that Luke's mission to Storm's End did not go so well. And it's just kind of horrifying to have that like smack in the face and also to place you immediately, this is happening literally moments after season 1 ended. And I think that's really bold of them to do. I was expecting more of a time skip, perhaps, and I'm sure we'll get another time skip at some point. But I do think that this season, I may be misremembering, but I believe this season is going to be unfolding in comparative real time compared to season 1, which definitely you saw these different snippets of time across the life of Rhaenyra and Alicent. So I just really like that part as well. But with that in mind, let's talk a bit about where we find people in the aftermath of Lucerys Targaryen and his not even a battle. He just got brutally attacked by his cousin Aemond. Cousin, right? I'm not misstating that. Half brother.
His uncle.
Oh my brain is pudding at this point. Hold on, let me.
Well, there's a lot of very similar names and a lot of Targaryens.
A lot of similar names, a lot of similar Targaryens. But let's start with where we find everyone in the aftermath of Lucerys Targaryen's ill-fated mission to Storm's End and the aftermath with his uncle who did a big old oopsie-doopsie atop his dragon. Perhaps the oopsiest of doopsies in all of Game of Thrones history, but that remains to be seen. Let's start with our favorites, your clear favorites, the Greens and King's Landing, and where we find everyone, and especially that small council scene, which I thought was so effective at just sort of setting up all these relationships and reminding you where everyone stands.
It's funny that they are all blaming Alicent as though Alicent was the only one making decisions. I hated this change, obviously. In the book, Alicent is the one who drives all of this. And here, they were already plotting without talking to her. She's doing it because of her husband's deathbed confession. But they're blaming her that they didn't take the opportunity to strike. Who made that decision? She's not the hand of the king. She's not the king. You guys wanted to try to have your cake and eat it too, right? We're going to usurp it, but we don't want to look bad. When you play the Game of Thrones, you win or you die, right? I mean, this is what we know. There's no half measures, to borrow from another show. And here they are, and they're all like, well, geez. And the funny thing is, what I really liked is that Aemon didn't tell him that it was an accident, because it means that that oopsie doopsie only kind of hurts his storyline as opposed to everything else, which is another thing I was very happy about. I also think that scene works so well because it shows how full of crap Otto Hightower has always been. His whole thing was, Daemon can't become king, he'll become a second Maegor. Maegor the Cruel, the worst king at this point in Targaryen history. And instead we've got Aegon II, who is the worst. Second worst. Aegon's a moron. We see this entire episode. Not only is he just a clown, he's an idiot, right? Like, it's one thing to be like a drunk, who's not taking his job seriously. He's in the royal court telling people his plans. I'm going to send Vhagar to turn it to ash. Well, that's great. I'm sure nobody here is a spy, right? Like, I'm going to tell everyone they could just have their goats and sheep back. Oh, wait, no, I'm not. Like, this is basic stuff. And you could see Otto's soul leaving his body, both during the small council and the royal court. And it's like, this is what you made happen. This is what you wanted.
Yeah, I do think that scene in the before the Iron Throne was super effective, though, because it just shows how ineffectual and out of his depth that Aegon really is. Like, he was right. He was right to try and run away because he's not ready for this responsibility. And yeah, I think everyone's just feeling they got some dragon egg on their face after his rushed coronation at the Dragon Pit, where Rhaenys broke free with her dragon Melise and just, very nearly could have ended the entire series there. No, not how it's written, obviously, but I was just kind of blown away to see. I always just love seeing how they play out the bureaucracy of court, because you just see a lot of these people really chafe under that when they're so ill-suited to rule. And I thought that was really well done. His slow walk up there, actually, we can't do that, and here are the reasons why, you absolute goon.
Yeah, and just to give the Greens credit, the acting on this show is superb.
Oh yeah,
it's easy to hate the Greens, but they're also great in making them even more hateable. Otto Hightower, he's just so good at being so bad.
He is just, every scene he's in, I'm just like, I can't stop watching you, you slimy bastard. You're incredible. Another moment I really enjoyed in the small council scene was when we had Tywin Lannister trying to get his little speaking orb back from the wee baby Jaehaerys.
What is this with these people with these orbs?
Yeah.
They take it so seriously.
Yeah,
it's like he can't talk if it's not in place.
And they abide by strict procedure and protocol there, except when Lyman Beesbury raises a single doubt over their plan. But yeah, it was interesting to see the dynamic there, because that is a court where everyone else seems to be taking control because Aegon doesn't know what he's talking about. But then you compare that to Rhaenyra on Dragonstone and her Black Council, which they're all kind of for the most part, kind of petrified and don't know what to do because Rhaenyra is absent for understandable reasons. She just experienced a horrific loss, but
which the show did a great job explaining, why that was not her being irresponsible.
Yes,
and this is something I really want to get into in terms of the emotional, personal part of this. But that was really well done.
Yeah, I mean, I thought they did a great job on Dragonstone of showing us more sides of it. I loved the sort of dragon landing area where we see the garage for the dragons where they park them when they arrive. But also we get some really great moments. We get this moment between Rhaenys and Daemon when she first comes back from patrolling. And I love how Matt Smith is playing Daemon, just a caged tiger. And he just keeps finding himself in slightly different cages. He thinks he's going to be able to break free, but he's still ultimately hamstrung by the fact that he is not the king. He will never be the king. In his current position, he can only be the king consort, which is not the king. It's just oh yeah, you're the first man. That you have responsibility, but it is not the responsibility you feel was your birthright.
And there's a very subtle thing here that I think is very telling. He tries to give a command, and she says, "If were but you the king," right? Whatever she says. And my question is, and I think this is really telling, why isn't he the hand of the queen? Why doesn't he have the authority when she's not there? Why didn't Rhaenyra give her husband, and I think it's safe to say her most capable warrior, and maybe even leader? I mean, this is an experience. We can say what we want about the Rogue Prince and him being reckless. This is a guy with a lot of experience. He fought wars for a long time in the Stepstones. He's a dragon rider. He's fearless. Why isn't he the hand of the king? It indicates that maybe she doesn't completely trust him and isn't totally sure that he is not going to try to usurp her. She knows her uncle husband as well as anybody, right? Better than anybody. And there's a part of her that seems to have the same fears the rest of them did. And I really am interested to see how the show is going to develop that going forward.
Well, she's keeping him at hand's length, and that is definitely a smart move on her part, as we see by the end of the episode, because, you know, Daemon is devious, cunning, capable, but maybe his follow-through leaves something to be desired, just because, as we see by the end of the episode, he maybe needs to be a little more explicit in his instructions to people, because it does not go well. But was there anyone else that you want to talk about on Dragonstone or in King's Landing? Anything that stood out to you, like maybe people on the Black Council, for example?
I liked that the Black Council is very focused.
Yes.
And they do seem united versus what we saw going on with the Green Council and Mr. Larys Strong, the Clubfoot. Already undermining Otto, Alicent, even Aegon. He's undermining Aegon by dividing them. And I promise we're going to avoid book spoilers as much as we can, but there is something that is very fascinating in Fire and Blood, which it says that Daemon had spies in King's Landing, including on the Green Council. But there's no obvious candidate outside of the only obvious candidate, the Master of Whisperers, who doesn't actually seem to be on the small council here because he's not at the meetings, but is still just as important. What is Larys's endgame? His closest equivalent in all of George R. R. Martin's stories is obviously Baelish, right? And Baelish just thought chaos was a ladder, right? Does Larys actually have any loyalty to anybody besides himself? Is he just always constantly sowing chaos, or is he really a loyal member to the Greens? He also has a scene with Alicent where he clearly knows what's going on with our favorite hypocrite and the worst human being on the planet. And he also says, "Oh, I killed all of the betrayers at court. I'm confident of that. And don't worry, I personally handpicked your own new bedchambers," who she immediately doesn't trust.
That was such a good scene where she's like, "All right, I don't trust any of you to even give me a bath because I know who's paying your bills." And it's such a power move by Larys as well to be like, "Yeah, I can replace your entire trusted retinue at the drop of a hat. I can snap my fingers, and guess what? My spies are everywhere." I think that he's someone who, his game is just how much power and leverage can I accrue to make, not just to make himself powerful, but just to like see what he can get away with, it feels like. Because I don't know how he gets much more powerful than this, because I don't think that he would ever wind up on the Iron Throne, but like maybe he wants to be the hand of the king. Maybe that's like his ultimate goal.
I wonder if it's even simpler than that, which is he just wants to marry Alicent. I don't want to think too much about that little foot scene in season 1, but let's be delicate here. When we see Alicent in her room, I thought for a second the camera was gonna pan down to show Larys, like those noises were coming from Larys in her feet. It was a different thing. But he knows what's going on. It's so obvious he knows what's going on, and I wonder how much jealousy is there developing there.
Yeah, well, it wasn't a foot thing this time around, but we did see more of a heel turn from Sir Criston Cole, violating
he's the best.
His oaths once again. You can't stop this guy from violating his oaths.
He loves it. Nothing makes him happier than violating his oaths.
Yeah, it's. I honestly, I did not. I don't think they really allude to this in the book. I don't think they really delve into a relationship between Alicent and Sir Criston in the book in quite this way. So it was kind of interesting to see, but maybe that's also a function of the book being a history being pulled from multiple unreliable narrators. So I think that's how they're able to get away with some of these other things. It's what I loved about, for example, last season, Aemond accidentally killing Luke, because in the book you feel like, oh, this was purposeful. He got caught up in the moment. He was angry, and he definitely killed his nephew on purpose. But here it's slightly different. And same thing with, you see it was more of an accident than a purposeful, he was chasing him because he wanted to just take his eye, but he didn't want to take him out of the sky entirely. So I was very, very intrigued to see how these other elements, like the relationship here between Sir Criston and Alicent, are expanding in ways that maybe I didn't pick up on when I was reading the book.
I think you're completely right that it's not really there, but there's enough breadcrumbs that you can get to that point, because it was always very obvious to me that, Rhaenyra and the worst human being on the planet had a intimate relationship, and that she rejected him, and that he turned against her, and all of a sudden was obsessed with her biggest enemy. This to me was a very logical development between the two of them, and it's not really there too strongly, but it's not there, if that makes sense. In the books, it's kind of left unaddressed, and because it's left unaddressed, I think it raises the possibility of what we saw.
Well, while we didn't see Sir Criston's White Worm this episode, we did see another White Worm on Dragonstone, the return of the Lady Mysaria. And I know they say Mysaria loves company, but this is ridiculous what happens with her in this episode. So let's talk about this, because she's back. She was, her nickname was the White Worm. She definitely profited from the downfall of the Blacks. She is now clearly not doing so hot because she's in custody on Dragonstone, and she also supplies the information that leads to one of the most horrifying moments of the episode, and sets up one of what we were expecting to be perhaps the most impactful adaptation of the book. So let's talk about Mysaria, and let's get into blood and cheese.
Well, it starts with some changes. In Fire and Blood, when Luke is killed, Daemon is no longer on Dragonstone. I'm not going to say where he is. If you rewatch this episode, there's a clue where he is. They've kind of just moved the timeline a little bit around, which not a big deal. But this change is a little bit more significant. Mysaria, who's also known as Misery, play on her name, she is still in King's Landing in Fire and Blood.
Right.
When all of this comes down, she is powerful. She's not fleeing, and she's no longer with Daemon, but they're still connected. There's not really any animosity, or at least that's what the historians tell us. So this is a change. She's fleeing. It forces the show to do something that they did twice, or actually 3 times, which was have Daemon address what people did and how it might have hurt the Greens, right? You could have ended their line. You and your traitorous brother helped find Aegon. You gave him over to Otto, and they all kind of have their reasons, Rhaenys doesn't have her reason, but she doesn't even try to defend herself.
Yeah.
Which at least I thought, again, was her recognizing I made a mistake. So fine, let's move on. So that's a change where he basically has to be like, you're my prisoner, and now you have to give me something to get out, versus what I think is better in the book is that they are working together based on their past relationship, which will be very fruitful and very important. I don't know what to expect from this change. I don't know if it's going to matter or not, but it was a change.
Yeah, I think it's more just I think they wanted geographically to keep everyone on Dragonstone, so I get why they did it. It just makes sense to be like, okay, well, we can't have Daemon in King's Landing just yet because it would kind of undermine his subsequent return there under the Shroud of Darkness. But I think that it was interesting that they brought Mysaria to Dragonstone as a prisoner, because that just creates such a strange dynamic of leverage with Daemon, whereas I liked in the book how she was still just, I'm still just a powerful broker of information and secrets in King's Landing, despite this crazy war that's about to unfold around me. And I do want to go back real quick. Just, you mentioned Rhaenys and her decision, maybe regretting her decision not to barbecue everyone at the Dragon Pit. I do think when I was rereading the book, they really harp on the idea that there were so many Targaryens that really, and this is going back to the time of Maegor, really believed that kinslaying was perhaps the worst thing you could do and would just lead to your line being cursed. And I think that was definitely how it plays out for Maegor, it seems. That seems to be the consensus among these historians, but maybe that was why. She probably would have defended herself, but to just torch everyone there wantonly might have been a bridge too far for her. But she is perhaps the only Targaryen without that qualm of kinslaying and taking things a little bit too far in this episode, especially when we see what happens with Daemon and a certain member of the Gold Cloaks and a certain rat catcher. So I think we've alluded to this a number of times in season 1. It's definitely been most anticipated moment, I think, in terms of how they're going to adapt it. And I know that may sound morbid to people who have read the book and people who have now seen the episode, because it's colloquially known as Blood and Cheese. Blood being the big beefy bruiser on the gold cloaks, and Cheese being the rat catcher. And it is just one of the most shocking moments in the book, and I think one of the most pivotal moments in the entire Dance of Dragons. And to see how they brought it to life here, it was a real roller coaster, because it starts off like, I would say it starts off pretty promising in terms of how it unfolds, like very tense. Walking right past,
very well. Yeah,
walking right past King Aegon, drunkenly talking to his friends and retainers, and on the Iron Throne, running into servants. It's just, and I also love that the rat catcher doesn't really want to go along with it at first, and is just bribed and threatened into complicity. But then he turns out to be, just as gruesome and gnarly as the rest of them.
Yeah, not exactly a consistent character.
Yeah.
15 minutes in.
When he kicked the dog, I was like, maybe this rat catcher is about to murder a child isn't a good guy after all.
So during season 1, they love to show rats. And every time they showed a rat, you and I, and just be like, oh, we were so excited. We kept teasing how excited we were for this moment without saying what it was. And anybody who's read the book knows this moment. I think it's the single most shocking moment in anything George R. R. Martin has written in A Song of Ice and Fire. I also think it's one of, it may be the best. It's as good as anything. I really believe that, because it is so gruesome, and yet as gruesome as you think it's going to be, there's this twist that is incredible that we did not get. And So I guess let's get into it, right?
Yes.
I'm angry. I've been angry.
Yeah.
It's the most disappointed I've ever been with any single adaptation. And you go to Nerdist.com. I wrote about this in great depth, but the key is adaptations are really hard, because even great books do not easily convert to the screen. They're different mediums. I get that. I defended most of the changes through the first 8 episodes of season 1. I get it. But sometimes a scene is written so perfectly that it's already perfect for the screen. And Blood and Cheese and Fire and Blood is perfectly written. It plays out like a short play. The dialogue's there, the facts are there, the emotion, and more importantly, the purpose. It's all there. It's on the page. Nobody had to do anything. To me, the entire reason you adapt the Dance of the Dragons for television is so you can film this scene. This is it. I would spend years working on this show specifically to do this scene, and then they went and dramatically changed it. I was okay with some of the early things, the ambiguity of Daemon's order. He says, we want Aemon. Does he give the code red to take any son if they can't find him, right? The ambiguity. Interesting. I don't care about lessening these characters' violence, but interesting. I totally get it. Defensible. Blood and Cheese being kind of bumbling morons, I didn't really like. But if we still got the scene that we were supposed to get, I would have been okay with it. In the books, and it's important, nobody's really worried about where Alicent lives, because Alicent's, even though Rhaenyra hates her, right, the view is she's a woman. She's fine. She's not the one we're really waging war with. It's Aegon, and it's Aemon, and it's Otto. She sleeps in the Red Keep, not in the part of the Red Keep called Maegor's Holdfast, which is where the king and the queen. But spies let Daemon know, who recruits Blood and Cheese via Massaria. Every night before bed, Queen Helena takes her 3 children, the 2 twins, Jaharis and Jahara, age 6, and her youngest son, Maelor, age 2. She takes them to her mother's bedchamber to say goodnight to Alicent. So, what I'm about to describe, you could tell, you're sitting there, if you don't know it, you could tell me if you think this is better than what we got. Blood and Cheese, because Cheese knows all of the secret tunnels, including into the Royals, which for some reason the show was like, I don't know where they are. He gets them into Alicent's bedchamber. They bound and gag her. They kill her bedmaid. Alicent then has to sit there not knowing exactly what's going to happen. She's completely helpless as these 2 strangers are waiting. Helena comes in with her 3 kids. They bar the door. They kill her guardsmen. They lock them. And they take Maelor and they tell Helena, a son for a son. A son for a son. For Luke, this is, but here's the thing. We're not just going to kill one of your boys. You tell us which one to kill. It's absolutely horrific. It's absolutely horrific because even though she's not quite as I guess simple, maybe the right word, or soft or delicate as she is on the show, she's still completely innocent in the book. Everybody loves her. Everybody loves her. Nobody has an issue with her, including the Blacks. They tell her, you have to choose your son. We're not just going to kill one. You pick. And she pleads with them, please take me instead. Take me instead. And they say, nope, you're not a son. And if you don't pick, we're going to kill all of you. So poor Helena then has to choose. And she chooses Maelor. And in Fire and Blood, the Maester writing it says, did she choose Maelor because she thought he was so young he wouldn't know what was going on, or because she didn't want to give up the Aegon's heir, the future king? And she says Maelor. They whisper into the boy's ear, did you hear that, boy? Your mama wants you dead. And then they chop off Jaharis' head instead. I remember the first time I read that, I couldn't even move. Could not move. Talking seeing how Hodor became Hodor, all of these things, it is absolutely shocking. You'd think this scene could not get any worse, and then it gets so much worse. And the thing about this scene, Helena and the kids are the victims, but it's about Alicent. Mm-hmm. It's about Alicent having to literally face what she has done. She literally has to face the consequences of her choices. And everything she claimed, that I'm keeping my family safe from that terrible Rhaenyra, she has made it so none of them are safe, not even the most innocent among them. The ones so innocent that they're not even worried about protecting them because they assume they're fine. This is all about Alicent, and completely, like you said, it frames the rest of the Dance of the Dragons. This is it. If you thought the gloves are off with Luke, there are no gloves. There's nothing. There is, in this, I thought the episode did a great job setting this up, because they had, not only did they have Cheese walk by her and Cole, they have the scene with her and her father, which was fantastic, where she says, I know violence is the only path forward, right? I kind of know what we're doing here, and I'm fine with it. I just don't want wanton violence. It's so naive. It's so ridiculous. Violence for the Iron Throne is fine, but not wanton violence, right? And then that's exactly what she was gonna get. And instead, she's not there. Not only is she not there, they don't even make Helena choose.
Yeah,
I don't get it.
I thought at least they would keep the moment of making her choose, and it is a grisly thing to be like, oh man, I really hoped they were going to do this, but it hits so much harder in the book for those reasons, because it just highlights the deep vein of cruelty that underpins this whole thing, and especially the lengths that Daemon is willing to go, and the places he's willing to go to that other people aren't. It has gone from just, okay, our armies are going to line up against each other and fight on the battlefield, to total warfare using treachery, skullduggery, assassins, and especially in the place that's supposed to be impregnable, inside the Red Keep. It is just a chilling moment in the book, and I kept waiting when I was watching the show. I'm like, are they going to do it? Are they going to do it? Then it's happening. I'm like, oh, and now she's walking down 100 halls to go find her mother, who is in bed with Sir Criston, which, look, I think that is effective in its own way of I'm your daughter, this is your grandson, we're in danger, and you're busy boinking the head of the Kingsguard. What the hell?
The person who should be
Mom?
Protecting us.
Yes, exactly. The person who should have been standing watch and defending the Queen's personage and the royal family, but instead was shirking his duty. And it's effective, but it's just pales in comparison when you know what could have happened. And this is HBO. This is Max. This is not network television. They have not really shied away from violence before, and I mean, they don't shy away now, even in the sound design. We saw a man's eyeballs exploded and his skull collapsed.
Stannis burned his daughter alive. The
Yes.
show opens with a golden knight pushing a child out of a window because he caught him sleeping with his sister. And the funny thing is, you could say oh, maybe they thought it was too violent. They actually, the only thing they upped was the brutality, because instead of a single chop of the head to Jaharis, they slowly sliced it off.
Yeah.
It was physically much more brutal. So why, this show is, I think, oversympathized Alicent. And it seems like they just want to keep protecting her. But because this is the worst moment of her life, and it's the worst moment of all of their lives, and she's not there for it. It's different. It's different between her being there and seeing what happened and knowing how responsible she is for everything that led to this moment, versus her having to hear about it secondhand. And there there was such some bad writing, right? Because I do think if you have no idea what's coming, this could be an effective scene.
Right.
I think the problem is when you know how much better it is, it just falls completely flat. A little parable of the cave here, right? We're not looking at shadows, you and I, because we've read it. But there's some bad writing here, because there's this fake tension about, are they going to kill the right child? Like, just lift up their pajamas. Like,
yeah.
What are we doing? What are you two idiots doing? This is not real tension, and that I think actually did take away from even the moment they delivered.
Yeah, I mean, just Mysaria did not send her best, and I guess the type of people that'd be willing to take a contract to murder a child in a castle in their sleep are also probably not the best. But it was definitely, it just felt like this cavalcade of errors versus a very intentional message being sent by Daemon through these agents of chaos and destruction. And yeah, I mean, look, it is shocking. I do think parts of it work. I was just, like you, very disappointed with how it played out, because, I just reread the book, and it hits just as hard the second time, even though you know it's coming. Hearing the description of it, it's chilling. And I think that tension just kind of like dissipated a little bit when you just see, I know sometimes you can get away, like, they didn't even have to show, like, they could have done the same thing with, like, don't show, obviously, the act of beheading a child. I'm not advocating for that. But, like, have Queen Alicent there. Have her there. That is, like, the crux of it, I think. Even if they don't make her choose, have Queen Alicent there to bear witness to what she has wrought, rather than be absent, like, absent mother, like, absent queen regent, you name it. But it was frustrating. It was frustrating.
They even made it so it didn't seem like much of a choice for Helena. Not that she wanted to do it, right? But they set it up earlier. They set it up earlier in the episode when she tells her husband, the king, like, what if Jaharis doesn't want to be king? Kind of implying, like, what if he doesn't want to deal with all of this because it's miserable and I don't want this for my kid the way Alicent did? So then at the end, it's like, oh, which one's the boy? She's like, oh, him. Because she figures, the way it reads is that she thinks, like, if I can only save one kid, my daughter will have a much easier life, because no one's going to try to put her on the throne. She'll be safe. So I can always keep her safe. I can't always keep him safe. Whereas, again, in the book, she is given a literal Sophie's choice, right? Choose one son or the other. Pick. And again, I think they sometimes want to protect their characters. Or not seem too cruel, but we're in Westeros. At this point, if you're watching this show and you're not prepared for cruel, I don't know why you're watching. So who is this?
You haven't been paying attention. It was not how I expected things to play out. She just kind of pointed immediately, and it was, I don't know, it just made it a little disappointing, because we had the nice little tease at the beginning where she's doing her needlepoint again, and she's like, I'm afraid of not the dragons, I'm afraid of the rats. And it's a nice payoff for that. Do you know what she was whispering at the beginning of that scene? Because I tried to listen a couple times, but I could not make it out.
I'm going to be completely honest. I kind of treat Helena the way everybody else does, which is like, she's peculiar,
But no, it's like she's whispered stuff that has had, like, oh, you can extrapolate, like, maybe this theory from it, because
I know, but they don't put it in the subtitles, and it's just like, I'm not a young man. I can't. I'm like, I did that all season one.
Need my ear trumpet. No, I just maybe I'll try watching again, because I watched this on my laptop, but I'll try again watching on, like, the TV with, like, some better speakers and see if I can make it out afterwards. But anyone in the audience, if you know what Helena was whispering, please let us know, because, well, at least let me know, because I cannot rest until I know the truth. Well, we've talked a lot about this episode. We've talked a lot about the stuff that made us happy, the stuff that made us frustrated. Who was your MVP of this episode, Mikey?
Oh, Come on, Dan. You know me. We met the Lord of Winterfell. Come on.
Of course.
That's Snow. He doesn't even have to do anything. Lord Cregan Stark. Let's go. Love him. Love it. Great casting, by the way. Oh my god.
Killer. That man has Stark face. He has resting Stark face.
I said to my wife, he's the Starkiest Stark who ever Starked. I love everything about him.
They found him in a lab, just that engineers people that look like they're from Winterfell. As for my MVP, I did love Cregan, but I also have to give some big ups to Jace, because I was so impressed. I loved how he handled himself in that initial scene where he's like, this is his first real diplomatic mission on behalf of his mother. And he's like on the cusp of coming of age, and the actor is definitely aged up a bit now. So he's looking like the little princeling. And it was cool to see how he handled himself and pushed back on certain items. But then that contrasted with Jace going to see his mother Rhaenyra on Dragonstone and trying to report in. All of his undeniable successes in securing major alliances for their army, but then just breaking down in tears because the weight of what's happened and the fact that his brother died, because in spite of being given what was supposed to be the easier, safer mission, really hits home. I thought that was such a powerfully done scene and so well done by both of those actors. I was just very impressed. So I'll give it up to Jace this episode. I'm intrigued to see where they take his character this season, especially maybe now that he's a little bit older, a little bit wiser, maybe a little bit more aware of the sort of push and pull and the tension around maybe who his true-born father is. So I'm very excited to see where it goes from there.
I'm glad you brought up that scene with his mother because, as I've mentioned, I think that this episode really gets the emotional stuff right. Because if you don't care about the people involved in this giant realm-consuming civil war, you're not going to care about the civil war. You have to really be personally invested. And this is what Game of Thrones always did great, and this is when House of the Dragons at its best. And that scene with here's Jason, he's just reporting back to his mother, and he's just doing it through tears, and then they just hug, right? Because they did lose somebody so close and important to them, and it's also a sign of what's to come. And just how emotionally devastating the story is and why it's one worth telling in the first place and giving it a big, expensive TV adaptation. That was really good. All the stuff with Rhaenyra was really good. And I'm glad that they took their time with it. If we want to talk about is 8 episodes going to be enough, if we don't get more of this, then it won't be enough. These are the scenes we want. We don't. The action will come, right? The action will come. We don't need Game of Thrones final season to just give up on all these scenes. These are the scenes that make everything else matter. So
exactly. This is what has always made Game of Thrones Game of Thrones. These sort of like palace dealings and like hallway skullduggery and these quieter moments where we see these characters behind closed doors amid all of the horror and chaos and bloodshed of all-out war. So I definitely think we'll get a lot more of that as the season unfolds. But I'm curious as well, were there any, we talked a lot about some of the big moments in this show so far. Were there any Easter eggs or moments that stood out to you that you think fans might have missed? I mean, for me, there was a couple characters that I sat up like Leo and Once Upon a Time in Hollywood when we saw Alan of Hull talking to Lord Corlys Velaryon, or Hugh, the blacksmith, coming before King Aegon. I thought both of those, folks, without spoiling anything, keep an eye on those characters. They may come back later on in the season in different capacities, but it was just cool to see them sort of like sprinkle this in now, lay the groundwork. But was there anything that stood out to you, Mikey?
Well, I think people should probably listen to what Hugh said they're building. They're building the Scorpion bolts, which we know how important those are.
Yes, we saw them at the beginning of the episode as well.
Yeah. We can't get into it without getting to spoilers, but I thought it was absolutely fascinating to see Hugh show up at all there.
Yeah, I was not expecting
Aegon. No, that is definitely new. Alan of Hull, we knew was coming, and I think the way that scene plays out is even if you don't know anything about Fire and Blood, you can tell something was going on there. I would definitely pay attention to that. In terms of the big lore was at the beginning, but in terms of stuff people should definitely maybe just be aware of, and I'm going to point this out. in classic Game of Thrones fashion, stuff that the show doesn't highlight, but just kind of does, can end up playing such an important role later on. So when we first meet Daemon, he is the commander of the City Watch. He's the one who gives them the gold cloaks that they are now known by, the gold cloaks. And it was when he went to King's Landing to hire Blood recognized him and called him commander, and showed that the gold cloaks do not like the high towers necessarily. I don't know how much more they're going to get into this in Fire and Blood. One of the first things they do is they put loyalists in charge of the gold cloaks, because they know the gold cloaks are still loyal to Daemon. In that vein, it's always fascinating when somebody suggests giving a Greyjoy a job.
Yep.
The Green Council's like, well, we do need a new master of ships. How about Dalton Greyjoy? Those are definitely the people we want to get into bed with.
I love that it's just this famously shitty family.
Like, we need a new master of ships. And if I were the council, not that I would be on the Green Council, my first thing would be like, okay, literally anybody but a Greyjoy.
Truly.
No Iron Islanders.
What about the family who's built on a creed of betraying you at every possible opportunity?
It's just I get politics, and I guess in this case war makes for strange bedfellows, but I would rather just not sleep than share a bed with a Greyjoy. Yeah.
Well, I mean, people who've read the books know what happens when you share a bed with a Greyjoy, but that probably won't happen this season, if at all. We'll see. I'm curious if we will wind up seeing certain members of House Greyjoy throughout the course of this series. Maybe, if at all, I would imagine towards the very end of this season, or maybe next season. But with that in mind, do you have any sort of parting thoughts or maybe predictions for season 2, things that you might want to see or hope to see? I know it's a little challenging with avoiding spoilers, but are there any things that you're hoping to see more of?
I love the scene with Alicent and Otto, these two people who are kind of at the hip. Not only did she kind of point out, it was great the way he's like, I hadn't thought about that. She is saying to him, we need to manipulate my own children, including the king. And she has that great line about, when Aegon basically tires of rule, right? Like, it's a novelty for him right now.
Yeah.
All we have to do is, she says, we have to mind him. Basically have to wait him out. And then we can do what we need to do. And Otto, tries to go to Aemon, and Aemon's not stupid, right? It says, like, your brother can't control himself, but you can. And that follows a scene where we see the worst person in the world conspiring with Aemon against not against, but like, they should not be talking war plans away from the king and the hand of the king. I love that. Those are all seeds being planted. Very few moments in this episode, maybe none, just kind of came and went. They mean something. So I would strongly suggest going back and watching this. As for predictions for the season, I can't say it without spoiling something huge. However, if you are familiar with Fire and Blood and you want to reach out to me, I will tell you where I think this season will end, which moment in the story this season will end. Interesting.
Well, with the repeated mentions of Harrenhal this episode, I do anticipate some sort of showdown there. I'm curious what showdown it could be, because there are several instances of people paying a visit to Harrenhal. We'll see which one that actually is if it comes to pass. But in terms of what I want to see, one of the things I loved about season 1 was that we got to see new sides of Westeros we haven't seen before, out in the surrounding areas, like the Stepstones. I would like to see more regions that we've not visited previously, because I love when they make this world even bigger. So I'm keeping my fingers crossed we'll get to see some different sides of Westeros that maybe we haven't spent as much time in here until now.
And they might have teased it with that map with Aemon and the worst person in the world. That might be, if you're looking for foreshadowing, I think that was a good one. The other foreshadowing we didn't even talk about was the new opening credits, which I thought were
the new opening credits were such an upgrade. I appreciate what they did with the previous one, like showing the bloodline succession, but this is awesome. I love the tapestries unfolding. I still don't love that they are just reusing Ramin Djawadi's Game of Thrones theme, but I am more okay with it now because this opening is just night and day compared to season 1.
I've come around on them reusing the theme. I agreed in season 1, but for all of my criticisms, and I know people think I want to dislike it, I promise it's the complete opposite. I want to love every second of this. When that music hits and there's a new episode coming, I just, it wins me over.
Yeah.
I nerd out. It's it. It's all I want. Give me more.
Just the endorphin faucet turns on, and then sometimes something turns it off, but it's still very pleasant. It's still a good feeling. I'm glad the show's back. And
Dan, why didn't they make the murder of a child worse? This is my issue.
This has always been my number one complaint about HBO. This is why I'm taking my business to Cinemax. All right. Well, folks, on that note, that is unfortunately about all the time we have for today. That's a wrap on our breakdown of House of the Dragon Season 2, Episode 1. Thank you so much for tuning in and joining us. Now, we're going to be here all season long, breaking down each and every episode for you. And we'll also have plenty of deep dives into Hot D lore waiting for you over on Nerdist.com as well, most likely penned by our one and only Michael Walsh. Mikey, apart from Nerdist.com, where can people find you?
You mean aside from the greatest website in the world? People can find me on the remnants of awful Twitter and also Blue Sky at Burger Mike, all one word, Burger Mike.
All right. Well, folks, you can find me on, like Mikey said, Nerdist.com and also on most platforms as either at Dan Casey or Osteoferocious. But with that said, thank you again for tuning in and tell us, what did you think of this episode? What was your favorite moment? Who was your MVP? Let us know in the comments. And thank you so much for tuning in. And for the latest and greatest in the world of pop culture, make sure you stay tuned to Nerdist.com.